Fintan O'Toole, it's great not just to have you in the programme, but actually in the studio. Welcome.
It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Now, I want to start in the United States. You were at the Democratic Convention, obviously the VP debate coming up next week. Is America ready to vote for Kamala Harris, do you think?
Well, nobody knows, and this is why it's on edge. There's no question but that the Democrats would not have nominated a black woman to be their presidential candidate, other than in these extraordinary circumstances. And
how can you be so sure of that?
Well, I think we kind of know because, I mean, she did incredibly badly in the primaries when she ran, when Biden
but
won.
But to be fair, in a different set of circumstances, in the middle of Black Lives Matter, as a prosecutor, so a very different story.
Yes, indeed, but you know, that term was around, and it was still around in 2024, early 2024, which was electability. So the way they were thinking, you know, the conventional way of thinking was America is not ready for this. And of course, on that logic, it will never be ready. And so this extraordinary set of circumstances forced them into a recognition and an honesty that half of Americans are women and a lot of Americans are people of colour. And she looks as much like an American, certainly, as Donald Trump does, maybe more so. But I don't think they would have got there if it were not for this sort of very strange chain of circumstances. And I think then they've got to go all in, you know. So they've been pushed further into embracing a kind of breach of the norms of American politics than they would have liked to go. And my instinct is that that's exactly the right thing to do. Trump breaches norms. You don't really fight Trump by staying within the old norms. You've got to do something new. And it makes her the candidate of change, which Joe Biden, of course, could not have been.
There is an irony, of course, or there's a point of interest in you being at that convention in Chicago, because of course it was a city dominated by Irish migrants. They were very powerful in the Democratic Party, but you can see in that convention that it's a new party, isn't it? Completely.
You know, it was interesting for me as an Irish person that the name Daley wasn't mentioned, right? And if you know anything about the history of Chicago, the Daleys, just father and son, I think about 45 years they governed Chicago as almost kind of sole dictators. This was the machine, the Democratic Party machine. And the first real moment in the Democratic Party convention, on the first day, the person who was wheeled out was Jesse Jackson, who was kept outside by that machine. You know, literally, when Jesse Jackson arrived in Chicago, Daley offered him a job collecting the fares on the public transport system, you know, and that was a black job. This phrase, black jobs, kept coming up, you know, what's a black job now? And it was fascinating that all that history, 1968 wasn't mentioned, Daley wasn't mentioned, the racism of the Democratic Party wasn't mentioned. And it was part of this thing of them being kind of forced to embrace their African-American heritage, forced to say, actually, the civil rights movement is really what's kind of created this moment for us. It was a very black convention in a lot of ways, and a lot of its energy and a lot of its optimism and its joy, you know, was really coming out of that culture and that history.
Let's move to the Trump side, where there is less evident joy, but of course he's, you know, it's a race that as I've just said, is way too close to call. Now, Trump's team has been trying to get him to focus on policy. They wanted more policy in the debate. They want him to talk about policy, but his instincts go elsewhere, don't they?
Yeah, you know, I mean, Trump knows that if it's policy, he loses. He doesn't have policies. You know, there was a moment in the debate with Harris when he started, you know, was being pushed a little bit about healthcare, and he said he had the concept of a plan, you know, in his head.
Yes.
And of course, Trumpism is not about policy. It's actually not about even achieving anything. I mean, did Trump, you know, reopen the coal mines for the coal miners in West Virginia? No. I mean, has he any intention of doing so? No. Will they still vote for him? Yes. You know, so even for his base, there's not a relationship between the promise of Trumpism and, you know, tangible things that governments will do for you.
So what is it that he is understanding? When he pushes back, we know that he won't do what anybody tells him to do. When they say talk about policy, he doesn't? What is it that he understands about his appeal?
What he understands is that his appeal is about resentment, you know, that it's about punishing the other side, the other tribe. And the pleasure that Trumpism undoubtedly gives its followers is a sort of sadistic pleasure in a way. It's a pleasure of saying, you know, we're putting it up to those other people, and that includes really almost anybody who's not a white Christian man, you know, in that kind of nexus. And Trump gets that, you know, he understands that that's what it's about, and he's going to keep doing the same thing. Now the question is, has he succeeded too much? So what Trump has done is he's normalised outrage. And that was very, very effective, that outrage in 2016. But it's nearly 10 years now he's on the road doing this stuff. And there's a slight feeling, I think, that it's getting boring. It's not outrageous anymore. So even the sort of mad stuff about, you know, Haitian immigrants, you know, supposedly eating people's cats and dogs, it's absurd, it's crazy, but is it really effective anymore? Does it actually stir that sense of transgression? Because the problem with transgression is if you transgress and transgress and transgress, you know, where do you keep going?
Unless this comes down to something more ordinary in the end, which is it's the economy, stupid, as Jim Carver would have said, that even if Trumpism is depleted, the economy is still really bad.
You know, the personal economy is bad. I think this is the thing that Democrats were very slow to understand. They keep saying, but look at the economic figures, look at, you know, employment and the stock market and growth and all those kind of things. But that doesn't matter to most people. What matters to most people is, what does my economy feel like? And of course, inflation has really hurt people. But Trump's actually very bad at talking about inflation, for example, or about you know, household costs. And this is the downside of, so not talking about policy allows him to do something else. That's his shtick, and he's brilliant at it. But it also means he has no narrative about, you know, ordinary people's lives in terms of those economic issues. The critical thing is whether Harris can create some kind of credible narrative about what she's going to do about people's daily circumstances.
It is. We are in the third electoral cycle for Trump and MAGA, the Trump base. You've already talked about the fact that it's possible that some of that, its power, the transgressive power is declining. Is there MAGA, is there Trumpism after Trump?
I think this is the fascinating question. I mean, trying to be slightly optimistic about it, if Trump loses, something is over. You know, if you go back 2 years, what did sort of thinking Republicans want? They wanted exactly Trumpism without Trump. Trump is an embarrassment. We've had January 6th. He's crazy. He's uncontrollable. He does all this mad stuff. Let's have a Trumpism without Trump, which was Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, and it bombed. And it bombed because whether those of us who are liberals like it or not, Trump is very entertaining. His followers find him really funny. They think of him as being somebody who's kind of on their side. They love the celebrity. They love all the transgression. They love all that stuff. And when you see the same kinds of policies and the same kind of toxic messaging coming from something like DeSantis, who is po-faced, not funny, not charming, you know, so replacing Trump seems to me to be almost impossible for the Republicans in the short term, which is why, again, the stakes are just so high in November. It does feel like it's a turning point one way or the other. And of course, what's so terrifying about it is, as you say, the margins are just so tiny.
Deep breath for the entire world. Fintan O'Toole, I could, of course, talk to you all night, but stop I must. Thank you for coming in.
A real pleasure.